When you think about what makes Phantasy Star Online special, the story probably isn't what comes to mind first. There was a single-player story for episodes 1 and 2, but the real selling point was teaming up with your friends and killing monsters together. And episode 4, which came out a few years later, was very much the same. There was a story, but the gameplay mattered most and continued to shine through. Episode 3, on the other hand, was a little bit different. It wasn't a new zone for you to explore and spend hours hunting rare items. Hell, it wasn't even a part of the other 3 episodes. Episode 3 was a standalone GameCube exclusive card game where your player character isn't even the one doing the fighting. And if that doesn't interest you, you're probably one of the many people that didn't buy the game. But episode 3 had something that the others didn't, and that was a full-length, single-player story mode featuring a vast array of characters. It almost felt like the opposite of the other episodes. You could hop online and play against your friends, but the real draw was playing solo and experiencing the story. And not to say too much, but what starts off as a pretty straightforward story slowly turns into some pretty dark stuff. I know people use this image to describe whenever a Nintendo game has any element of horror to it, but you gotta trust me when I say this is more than just a little bump in the road. This game introduces a lot of characters, and all of their lives slowly start to change throughout the story, for better and for worse. In fact, this video describes it pretty well. So today, we're going to be taking a deep look into the story of PSO Episode 3, and hopefully you'll come to appreciate it as much as I do. To do that though, we need to first talk about what happened in episodes 1 and 2. This game heavily relies on the events of the previous game, which unfortunately wasn't a big part of it, so I'll give you a very brief synopsis in case you don't remember. The spaceship Pioneer 2 arrived in orbit of the planet Ragal after it was determined it was suitable for life. Everyone on board was fleeing the war-torn planet of Corral and believed Ragal could serve as their new home. But as Pioneer 2 attempted to communicate with Pioneer 1, the first ship that was on the surface, there was a massive explosion on the planet. The player characters, who would later become known as the 4 Heroes, were sent to explore the planet and found that it served to be the resting place of the dormant god of destruction known as Dark Falls. 2 prominent members who were aboard Pioneer 1 stand out, those being Rico Tyrell and Heathcliff Flowen. Rico attempted to stop Dark Falls herself, eventually being consumed by the god and becoming a twisted manifestation of it. That sucks. Flowen, while attempting to fight back against the creatures Falls infected, came in contact with the same virus that infected them. But knowing that he can't be cured, he allowed Pioneer 1 scientists to experiment on his body to learn more about the virus. But these scientists end up going a little bit too far, and they attempt to control the virus into creating some sort of human weapon hybrid. Flowen's mind slowly gets taken over, and the end result is an abomination named Olga Flo. But thanks to you, the player, both Dark Falls and Olga Flo are defeated multiple times as you went through the different difficulties, and the stories for both episodes end right after those fights. But according to the opening crawl in episode 3, the principal government covered up the secret of what Ragal held, and as a result, the citizens on Pioneer 2 have lived their life in orbit ever since, a whole 21 years later after episode 2. But just leading up to where episode 3 starts, a new resource was found on the planet which, when used correctly, allows objects to be digitized into cards and summoned on a whim. This innovation is named Card Technology and is a key point to the game's main story. Episode 3 is unique in that it has 2 different storylines that happen simultaneously. These are the Hunters, working for the principal government, and the Arkz, who are anti-government agents. The player character plays the role of the commander of either side, leading the other characters in battle. While your player character is important in that you essentially control the actions of the other characters, you don't show up in any cutscene, nor are you individually that important to the story. It's a bit of a shame, but I guess they had to make room for each character to have their time in the spotlight instead. Speaking of, trying to cover all 24 characters would make for a very long and very sloppy video. So I'm only going to be focusing on the 3 main characters from each side, along with the most important supporting characters. Outside of the overarching story of the Hunters versus the Arkz, the sub-stories of each of these characters can be divided up in 3 ways. Of course, none of this is official, it's just a better way to keep track of all the different stories that happen throughout the game. The first we can refer to as the Sophia sub-story, the second is the Blitz sub-story, and the third will be the Inheritor sub-story. So we begin with an overview of both sides of the story. For the Hunters, you operate out of the card research lab named the Morg. The man in charge of the Morg, who assigns you missions from the government, is Chief Pentaglass. While he's a little more focused on the political side of things, his secretary Karen is there to pick up the slack. For now, your two goals as a commander are to conduct field testing with card technology and assist with the development of Ragol. The main three characters on the Hunter's side are a trio of childhood friends, Silver, Kranz, and Enolis. As you progress through the game, you'll be able to talk with any of the characters that are at base, but for now you just have the initial three. Silver only recently joined the card lab and is admittedly a little worried about using this brand new technology in actual combat, so she's looking forward to having you help her out. Kranz, while not being as educated about the weapons he's using, is happy to make your acquaintance and he has his full trust in you. Almost. Finally, you meet Enolis. Of the three of them, she feels the most out of touch with what's going on with card technology and you being her commander, but regardless, she's ready to go. On the other side, a similar stage is set for the Arkz. Your main base is a hidden laboratory on Ragol's surface named R-Base, and you meet the secretive man in charge who only goes by the name Red. The Arkz are mostly comprised of former Pioneer 2 lab workers, and they've developed their own version of card technology that uses animal data instead of equipment. The big goal of theirs is to stop the overdevelopment of Ragol, seeing it as an exploitation of the planet's resources, as the actual citizens of Pioneer 2 still don't have a place they can call home. The main characters here are Break, Lura, and Endu, and you don't really learn a lot about them at first. Break lets you know immediately that he's not taking any nonsense orders from you, and he doesn't want to talk about his past. Lura is quite close to Break and accidentally lets slip the secret that, even though she's a humanoid, she feels this strange sense of urgency inside her whenever he's in danger. And finally, Endu is a skilled fighter and has taken a keen interest in the swordsmanship of those both in the Hunters and the Arkz. Besides that, he also tells you that most people working for the Arkz have secrets to hide and that there's something particular off about their leader, but doesn't go any further than that. So at this point, the stage is set for most of the major players in the story. Both organizations are effectively in an arms race to try to outdevelop the other's card technology, while at the same time fighting over possible developmental areas on Ragol. The Hunters operate by themselves in the field, but they can use cards to equip whatever armor or weapons you put in their deck. On the other side, the Arkz are able to summon creatures to fight alongside them, but they have very limited defenses themselves. So you pick a character you want a deck to be based around, and then set up the cards you want them to have. Each character has their own base stats as well as any additional abilities, so there are a variety of playstyles that you can utilize. I won't be going terribly in-depth with the gameplay in this video, beyond some of the more important fights later on. Just know that, despite the AI being pretty slow with their turns sometimes, it's surprisingly fun for a card game version of PSO. The first substory you can get into is the Sophia substory, focused on Silver, Break, and Lura. One of the first missions you receive on both sides is investigating a fossil site on the surface. Silver asks you to send her on that mission, having never seen fossils before due to living on Pioneer 2 most of her life. She also briefly mentions that she's looking for information on her sister, but doesn't say any more than that. At the same time, Break is found contemplating on whether or not to talk to someone, but ultimately asks you to deploy him on that mission. So both of them make their way to the fossil site and end up coming across each other. After the battle, you can see the first cutscene of the game. Silver ends up getting the upper hand and warns Break that there's a bounty on all Arkz members. But Break shrugs off the threat and questions if Silver is truly in it for the money or is just obedient to Dull Grisson, who is the current principal of Pioneer 2. He tells her that the principal government merely sees the Hunters as means to secure their own power and to not get in the way of the Ark's actions. Silver fires off a round near Break, but he telepipes out of the area, saying that her fiery personality is very similar to Sophia's. The cutscene ends with Silver left in shock, asking out loud how he knows the name of her older sister. Following this mission, Silver is found spacing out about her past. She tells you that prior to joining the Hunters, she was hospitalized for an unknown injury, causing an emotional shock strong enough that makes her memories foggy around that time. As for her sister Sophia, all she has to go on is a vague recollection of what she looks like, a photo of her, and an unexplained feeling in her chest that just won't go away. On the other side, Break can be found thinking out loud, particularly about how Silver doesn't seem to remember him. The most plausible reason he gives is that the injury she received hasn't fully healed, but briefly considers the possibility of the government tampering with her memories before dismissing it. Later on, while on a separate mission with Lura, He explains that he used to work for the Hunters in the past. He also brings up his fighting style, which he names the Miyama sword style. If the name sounds familiar, that's because there was a character all the way back in episode 1 named Zoke Miyama. He was known as a legendary hunter and was friends with Heathcliff Lowen, but at this point in time, both hunters have been long deceased. Also around this time, Lura brings up how Break treats her differently compared to how rough he is with everyone else. She also tells you about a device she's looking for called a heart unit, which would allow her to emotionally respond to a wider array of scenarios, such as reacting to the weather. So that's all you have to go on for the time being, as the Blitz substory is introduced shortly after. The characters this substory focuses on are Kranz, Enolis, and a third member you soon meet named Kilria. She tells you that in the past she did freelance exploration work on the surface, and learned all of her combat experience from an unnamed teacher that she wasn't able to spend a lot of time with. You also learn from Kranz that he joined the Hunters to help look for information on his father, who went missing a few years ago. You eventually receive a mission to keep an eye on some suspicious figures spotted on the surface, with Kranz already being dispatched to the location. This is the first and only time in the game where you choose between two different characters, in this case Enolis and Kilria, to accompany him, with each getting their own cutscene. With Enolis, after the mission ends, she and Kranz have an actually really sweet conversation. The two of them reminisce about how they're both ship children who should have been born on Ragol, but they still view it as their home planet. Kranz makes an unintentionally flirtatious comment to Enolis about how much she's grown since they were kids, which gets her all sorts of flustered. But before she can get her feelings together and tell Kranz how she feels, he stands up and asks if they should make their way back to the morgue. If Kilria is assigned to the mission, the two of them introduce themselves for the first time. Both of them are in good spirits until Kilria asks why Kranz went to the surface, and he brings up his missing father. Kranz's dad was a hunter that was aboard Pioneer 2 when it reached Ragol, and following retirement, he started going off on unspecified investigations without saying anything to his family, before disappearing 2 years ago. He also tells her that he has an older sister, but doesn't remember anything about her since she grew up with their mother following their divorce. While he doesn't respect his father for his actions, Kranz still has enough responsibility to look for him, seeing himself as his father's only family. If you find Kilria after the mission, she tells you a little bit more about her teacher. Apparently he used a wide variety of nicknames, but referred to himself as Blitz. And while telling you about him, she appears to come to a sort of realization after telling you that he disappeared just about 4 years ago. Enolis, on the other hand, is left in the dust as Kranz is entirely focused on finding his father and doesn't seem to pay her any mind. She doesn't seem to understand what's going on though, and just chalks it up to him having an attitude problem. And on that sour note, we can now move on to the Inheritor substory. It primarily focuses on Endu, but another character named Relmitos soon becomes involved. To set the stage, Endu tells you a bit more about himself. He has a philosophical talk on what it means to fight, and tells you that for him, fighting gives his life meaning. He also has a talk with you about trust, saying that even though everyone in the Arkz is pleasant enough and shares a common goal, it doesn't necessarily mean they trust each other. Endu is sent on a mission when he comes across two hunters, Orland and Relmitos. Briefly, Orland is a man of few words who prefers to let his weapons do the talking, and is the bodyguard of Relmitos, who claims to be highly skilled despite looking young. Endu crosses blades with Relmitos and is quick to notice him using the Miyama style. In response, Relmitos says that his style is much more dated, noting that his blade and his techniques don't match. When there's a break in the action, Endu brings up Zoke's teacher, Nef Miyama, which sparks a reaction from Relmitos. The two of them stop fighting, and Endu mentions a time when Nef Miyama came to his aid a long time ago. Relmitos in response is pretty confused by this, but before the discussion goes any further, Orland cuts in. Endu makes note of both of them using the same style as Break, and concedes any further fighting. With the two hunters left alone, you'll learn that Relmitos' true identity is Nef Miyama, but he has no idea who Endu really is. So with all three sub-stories now being introduced, we can get into the bigger picture with the overall story of the game. Up to this point, it would be easy to assume that the individual character stories are the primary focus of the game, but to be honest, almost every cutscene and piece of dialogue can be ignored. You don't have to send certain characters on certain missions and see their cutscenes, nor do you have to talk to them in their respective home bases and learn more about them. All of that is entirely optional. The only hints you got were when characters mentioned something to you about going on the next mission. Then you had to complete it and see if you would be rewarded with a cutscene or not. It felt like a nice surprise when you got one, but it was very possible to miss out on some lore because you got unlucky and picked the wrong guy. So that's why I recommend using a handy little guide that shows you who to send where, just to be sure you don't miss anything. Another thing worth noting are the 2 branching paths you get for each side, noted by the red and blue colorings. This means you have to complete each story 2 times in order to get the full picture, which does seem like a lot, but the game gives you an incentive to do that much later. But for now, let's get into the bigger picture with the principal government and the Arkz. As you progress through the missions on the hunter side, you learn about another objective that the government has, which is looking for the material used to create card technology. Having this at their disposal would be a good resource, but also greatly help in fighting against the Arkz. You also hear something similar from Red, as finding this material would be a big advantage in stopping the government's activities on Ragal. Also, Pentaglass starts to show his true colors as you continue to successfully command missions for him. It goes from him using you to leverage his own reputation within the government to eventually nursing hangovers because he's too busy partying to do his job. Meanwhile, the Arkz managed to successfully perform a hack on Pioneer 2 to retrieve some information, specifically from a database close to Principal Dol Grissom. After learning the specifics, something is very apparently off about Red, and he needs some time to process what they've just learned. Instead, the Vice Chief tells you that this information is related to human experimentation and weapons development going on in Pioneer 2. And as if that wasn't bad enough, the subjects of these experiments are currently roaming free somewhere on Ragal. And not only that, you learn from Red that the government is inserting bizarre implants into people's bodies. None of this is brought up on the hunter's side, so it's clear that whatever is going on is being hidden from almost everyone. Later on, he also tells you more about the resource that the government and the Arkz are looking for. The working name for it used by both the hunters and the Arkz is the germ, and he says its existence has resulted in multiple power struggles in Pioneer 2 with how it should be controlled. But further investigation shows that the germ in its raw form is a lethal virus, and if the principal government found the source of it, it would be incredibly dangerous for everyone on Pioneer 2. On top of that, what both organizations are really looking for is the source of the germ. While there isn't enough information on it at this point, you're told that it's being referred to as the Great Shadow. Around this time, the government receives a strange unnamed request for a meeting on Ragal, and to make things more weird, it's specifically addressed to Silfer. When she arrives at the location, none other than Break is there to try to talk to her. He wants to confirm the suspicion that Silfer had truly lost her memory, and at this point that does appear to be the case. He breaks the news to her that the 3 of them, that being Silfer, Break, and Sophia, had all worked together as a team in the past. Obviously, Silfer doesn't take this news well, especially when he says he doesn't know anything about Sophia's current whereabouts. But there is something that Break does hide from Silfer during this conversation, that being a memory of him stabbing her directly in her heart. After this meeting, Break tells you that Silfer is holding some specific information that's vital to the Ark's plans, but because of her memory loss, he can't learn anything from her. The best he can do right now is keep trying to jog her memory and not go too hard on her when they fight. Lura, meanwhile, has a run-in with Nef Miyama while conducting a mission on the surface. She doesn't take too kindly to him asking if Break is her master, and holds him at gunpoint, underestimating his strength. Before she realizes it though, he renders her immobile with a paralysis spell. Nef then notices that her torso has been modified and uses this opportunity to take a look. After cracking her open, he appears to find what was inside her, but is quickly cut off by an unknown voice asking him to leave the girl alone, and that the object inside of her is needed by someone else. Nef obliges and leaves her alone, but not before wondering out loud what Break's overall goal is with her. When she gets back to base, she tells you she's starting to get worried about what's inside her body, and that Break lately has been very depressed around her. And just a few steps away, Endu very much starts to take notice of the changing mood of his 2 comrades and asks you how you would deal with people whose emotions get in the way of doing their job. He says that, hypothetically, if a core member of the Arkz can't carry out their overall mission because of their emotions, he would deal with them straight away. On the next mission he goes on with Break, he pauses their battle with Kranz and Silfer to say that someone has been leaking Arkz information, and also mentions that Break has been talking a lot with the hunters lately. So to prove his loyalty to the Arkz, Endu throws a blade to him and asks Break to kill him, here and now. In response, Break tells him he doesn't want to spill blood to further the Ark's goals, but raises his weapon to remove Endu's doubts. But as he's about to strike, a sniper round whizzes past them and the hunters make their escape. It's very likely that Break suspected Endu would make him prove his loyalty, as we see that the round was shot by Lura, who escapes before Endu can find her. But he seems content with Break's actions and is happy to call him a comrade once more. The next time Kranz and Kilria are deployed on a mission together, Kilria takes a moment to ask Kranz what his father's name was. Sure enough, he went by the name Blitz as well, and she reveals that they're looking for the same person. With Kranz still trying to process what she told him, the two of them agree to team up and look for Blitz together, and Kilria mentions that she's found some more clues as to his whereabouts. Enolis, meanwhile, is starting to ramp up her efforts vying for Kranz's attention, buying various accessories and trying to show them off to him. She also assures you that she'll always be available for battle and on the government's side. Probably. And she asks to be sent out on the next mission because she's on your side, remember? So she goes on that mission, and she comes across the Arkz members of PSO and Kranz, the latter of which being a founding member of the Arkz and someone who holds quite a bit of influence in the organization. The two of them overpower the poor girl and tie her up, not to take as a hostage, but to try to recruit her to their side. Kranz asks if the corporate restricted life of a hunter is really what she deserves, and that working for the Arkz would give her a lot more freedom. She starts to list off all the fancy benefits Enolis would get, and it becomes a bit too much for her to take in, but Kranz also makes it a point to claim that they've given the same pitch to Kranz and Silver, but they're both totally just keeping it a secret. They wrap up the conversation by giving Enolis a location to meet them if she ever wants to join the Arkz. The two Arkz members have a separate run-in with Kranz after Blitz previously told him to contact them if something ever happened to him. Kranz and PSO don't share much, but they do say that they received a message from Blitz not too long ago. They give Kranz the location, but only so they can see for certain if he truly is Blitz's son. He investigates the area with Kilria, and they're about to leave empty-handed, but a capsule on the ground lights up in reaction to both of their section IDs. From there, a voice recording from Blitz starts to play. After the message concludes, the two of them promise each other not to give up looking for him, and they return to the Morg. And at this point, as the player, you immediately get the sense that something big is going on when the calm background music of the Morg is replaced with this. The development division has apparently discovered the location of the Great Shadow, and Pentaglass is furious, seeing this as Dulgrissen's attempt to cut him out of the picture. You're told that, at this location, a weapon that dates back to ancient times woke up and began attacking them. In response, Pentaglass is openly boastful about how, in the end, they do need his lab's help, and officially gives the order for everyone to move out. You also tell Enolis that she, in fact, cannot put on a dress right now and try to get Kranz's attention. On the other side, Arkz cyber intelligence managed to grab the information about this ancient weapon in a hack on the government's central computer, but they're running off something a lot more sinister. The information that's been decrypted so far suggests the principal government is developing what they refer to as an ultimate weapon on Ragol, and whatever lies in this Great Shadow area might be related. Either way, hunters or Arkz, you head to this Great Shadow. As for what you find inside, the security division has classified it as a sort of guardian that was used on Ragol in ancient times. And this is what you're greeted with. This enemy, named the Lucon Knight, doesn't summon anything because it comes right at you, and every turn he changes color, indicating he's either immune to physical attacks or tech attacks, and he has all sorts of cards that you really can't read, so you just have to cross your fingers and hope he's not just gonna wipe you. But with you commanding the battle, the Lucon Knight is eventually defeated, and both the government and the Arkz are eager to take a deeper look into the place. It turns out this temple isn't the Great Shadow, but it may be able to provide some data as to where it actually is. Additionally, the Arkz learned that their initial fears of the government building an ultimate weapon were not correct. So things have officially calmed down in terms of active threats, but all three of the main hunters are going through their own problems. Silver is taking some time to process everything that's been happening lately, both with the temple and how she may have been comrades with Break. Kranz, meanwhile, pulls you aside and asks for some advice. He's starting to get a little nervous because Kilria has been much more friendly with him lately, and he doesn't quite know what to do about it. And Enolis, well, is absolutely sick of Kranz not paying attention to her. When she showed him her new earrings, his only response was to wonder how Kilria would look on them. What a guy. But even with all that, her feelings for him are very real, and she'll finally tell him how she feels when she builds up the courage. And finally, on the other side, Break lets you know that preparations are already being done on finding the Great Shadow. He alludes to them having a secret weapon of sorts, but clearly whatever it is causing some internal conflict. So I would say at this point, if you wanted to try the game out for yourself and not be spoiled on the rest of it, this would be the right time. We're just over the halfway mark when it comes to the missions, but in terms of the story, everything up to this point was merely establishing the characters. From here on out, things start to ramp up, so get ready. As you go through the game, you start to pick up on a certain event that happened prior to Episode 3, one that, even though is never mentioned beyond conversation, made a very grave impact on Pioneer 2. That event being the OPSS incident. Leading up to the incident, humanoids, or castes, weren't exactly treated the same as humans were, and the population on Pioneer 2 was slowly getting larger, resulting in there not being enough room for everybody to feasibly live. So in order to make more room for people aboard Pioneer 2, the government ordered the army to massacre hundreds of humanoids and jettison them into space over a 3-month period. Several of the humanoids you meet in the game talk about their experience with the incident in one way or another. A member of the Arkz named Rio tells you more. The whole incident was orchestrated by the current Pioneer 2 principal, Dal Grisson, who replaced Principal Colin Tyrell from Episode 1. Among Grisson's various accomplishments, which includes the weapon research that gave birth to card technology, he enacted radical population control laws on board the ship, which resulted in the OPSS incident. Following the massacre, castes were given the same rights as humans and were no longer referred to as androids, but rather humanoids, something that the older generation is still clearly trying to get used to. But as for former Principal Tyrell, he attempted to lead a revolt against Grisson, but one day simply vanished from Pioneer 2 and was never seen again. Back to the present, Break and Lura run across Neff and Orland while they're on a mission. Neff is quick to ask why Break is fighting alongside a humanoid and references the OPSS incident. When Break demands to know who he is, Orland helps him put the pieces together, referencing how they both studied under the same master. While it's not clear what Neff did to hide his identity, Break makes reference to him artificially extending his life with certain drugs that are powerful enough to essentially make him a walking corpse at this point. But Neff quickly moves the conversation back to Break and pleads with him that joining the Hunters would help him reach his goal faster. He tells his master that he could never become a hunter again, as he was forced by the government to help carry out the OPSS incident. Despite Neff claiming responsibility for getting his students involved, Break simply can't go back to that side. The hunters leave after Neff warns him to be careful, and Break and Lura are left alone. Before she can say anything, his guilt about being involved in OPSS reaches a breaking point. He tells her that because of his past actions, he would have no objections to her taking his life in retaliation. But Lura understands how much it weighs on his conscience and tells Break that's exactly why she believes in him so much. When she gets back to our base, she tells you that Break finally told her what was inside her torso. It's described as a memory from Break's old love. And speaking of love, Enolis gets into a squabble with two Arkz members, Krenu and a kid named Memoru. With just Enolis to fend for herself, Memoru decides to share some real and factual news about Kranz, and that he doesn't care for her at all. The two Arkz go back and forth, saying that anybody could tell with how often he's been with Kilria instead. Memoru even goes so far as to literally point at Enolis and declare to the world that she is, in fact, an idiot. And as they walk away after torturing the poor girl, Krenu reminds Enolis that she can still join them at any point, like many former citizens of Pioneer 2 have. And when she tries to fight back, Krenu gives her the KO punch of asking if she would truly stay at Kranz's side if he doesn't love her, and never will. Enolus is in a state when she gets back to the morgue, and Silver doesn't get much of a response from her when she brings it up. All of her anger is being directed at Kilria for taking Kranz away from her, and she wants revenge. She's becoming desperate for ways to get his attention, and the last thing you hear from her is that she finally has a plan. Around this time, you learn from Red that among these hunters is an informant that's been providing them details on what's going on in Pioneer 2. The following mission is launching an attack on the Pioneer 2 transportation system on the surface, and if this mission is a success, it would not only stop the informant from escaping, but allow the Arkz to sneak directly onto Pioneer 2. On the other side, Pentaglass theorizes that there's a traitor leaking information, but his first thought on catching him is believing it'll just give him a promotion. In the meantime though, he wants to look into the temple again and see if there's anything further that can be dug up. Following a closer look at the temple, Pioneer 2 researchers determined that the Lukon Knight served as one of many mass-produced weapons created by the ancient civilization of Ragol, and they go so far as to say its purpose was to seal away whatever had threatened this civilization so long ago. Normally, progress like this is a step in the right direction, but as the mission wraps up, you're told to report to Pentaglass immediately. Explosions can be heard and your screen is shaking as he tells you the morgue is soon to be under attack by the Arkz, but it's not his fault, so don't worry. His assistant adds that nobody seems to know where Enolus is at the moment. Kranz and Silver both notice her missing as well, with Silver not being able to shake the feeling that something just doesn't add up. Kranz also brings up how he forgot to do a government-mandated section ID check for the past few days, which hunters need to do for surveillance reasons. Before the battle, you can also talk to Neff and Orland. Neff theorizes that someone leaked out the information on how to invade Pioneer 2, and that they're looking to get their hands on a specific piece of data, and fast. Orland takes this time to tell you that he and Brake were childhood friends, and he's worried about his involvement in the attack. The mission you receive from Red is twofold. The first objective is to steal a memory core from the Pioneer 2 data storage vault, which contains the biodata for someone in their database. The second objective, of course, is to destroy the morgue. Things are a lot more calm in our base, with everyone preparing for battle or looking to get revenge on the government. Brake tells you that Endu is one of the people spearheading this operation, and he's already at the transportation site. Kranu, though, tells you she has her doubts about the swordsman. Nobody's pinned down how old Endu is or where he's from, and he essentially just showed up to the Arkz one day and was brought on simply because he wanted to join. You also receive a message from another Arkz member prior to the attack, which mentions a certain new recruit to their side. For both sides of the story, the attack on the Morg consists of 2 back-to-back 2v2 battles with a time limit placed on each one. And unlike the previous team battles where you just gotta take out one person, now you have to take out both enemies in order to progress. So going off script for just a second, I have to talk about how much I love these battles. Hearing the normal calm theme of the Morg being transformed into battle music when people on both sides are challenging each other or just wondering how it got to this point,
It's just cool to see so many characters in the same place like this.
I know I brought up the speed of the game being my biggest complaint, but that doesn't feel like it's an issue on this map in particular. Most of the battles in this game are just a fight at a location, but this is the Morg. This is where everyone is. Anyway, the enemy AI has a tendency to gang up on your teammate during these fights, so if they can tank for long enough, you shouldn't have any problem with these battles. If they can't, well, you'll just have to mop up a little. After these 2 battles, you finish off with a one-on-one against either Break or Kranz, and after that battle, the attack on the Morg concludes. On the Hunter's side, you get to see the immediate aftermath of the attack. The Morg is completely destroyed, and Pioneer 2 Upper Brass are furious. But more importantly, everyone is thinking about Kranz. Silver heard that he's allegedly in the hospital, but she was the closest to him when the bomb went off and has a very hard time believing that he survived. She also wonders why Enolis was working with the Arkz and starts to beat herself up for not talking to her sooner. Kilria wonders if she should have stopped him, but had he not focused the blast on himself, it would have created a massive hole in Pioneer 2 and done a lot more damage. Karen, on the other hand, isn't able to keep the secret any longer. As it stands, Kranz will succumb to his injuries, but with enough resources, they can use classified technology within the government to clone him. The reason for this has to do with how messages from Blitz only react with he and Kilria's section IDs, and Blitz is the only lead they have for finding the location of the Great Shadow. The government is willing to do whatever it takes to get that information. The cloning technology noted by Neff was also taken by the Arkz, despite their strong opposition to using it. Red sends everyone a message that they're beginning to analyze the data they stole, and includes a small note for Break regarding the cloning technology being used for a revival experiment. He's still very conflicted about using this technology, but believes it to be the only chance they have to find the Great Shadow. While you don't know of any personal reasons for them to hate cloning, one Arkz member makes a small comment about how Red's daughters were impacted by it in the past. Endu speaks up as well, wondering how Break and Red would turn to cloning when they both have past reasons to hate it. But in the end, the Arkz will finish what Principal Tyrell had started. Speaking of Endu, he goes back to the temple to collect more information when he runs into Neff and Orland. He picks up where their conversation last ended and asks Neff about his sword technique. In response, Neff gives the hypothetical that if he were Zoke Miyama, Endu would have a style similar to Heathcliff Flowen. In fact, Endu's fighting style is one-to-one with Flowen, but with the swordsman already dead, Neff demands to know who Endu is. He doesn't tell him, of course, but does share what his personal goal is, which is to destroy the Great Shadow and not allow anyone to get in his way. At that moment, Rio fires a few rounds into Neff, and Endu raises his sword for the killing blow, but something stops him and he suddenly drops his blade. He starts seemingly talking with himself, with the force controlling his body telling him not to go so far as to kill Neff. He responds to this force by apologizing for letting his emotions get the better of him. The two Arkz then make their way out of the temple, but Neff is left thinking about who or what Endu truly is. You find him talking to himself, asking why Neff is still alive after so much time has passed and so many people have died. Something's clearly changed about him as he tells you to remember what happened to Pioneer 1 and the reason why Pioneer 2 has been stuck in orbit for so long. Later on, he gets right to the point and directly names Dark Falls, despite that information being completely hidden by the government. He then goes on to label the entirety of card technology as no more than a toy, and asks you what you would think if this same power was utilized by Dark Falls when he massacred everyone on Pioneer 1. We still don't know who Endu truly is, but it's clear that he knows a lot more than he's letting on. It's also clear that Break has a lot going through his mind as well. Kranz's sacrifice clearly messed him up, and he wonders if all of this fighting just to gain access to the technology he hates is truly worth it. He also brings up an unnamed woman, assumingly Sophia, and says with this technology he'll finally be able to see her again. That said, she also hated cloning the most, so should it succeed, Break doesn't know how she would react. Sometime afterwards, with the cloning of Sophia apparently a success, he tells you it's time for him to meet her sister and tell her everything. Silver then receives a message directly from Break, and she feels ready to learn the full story from him. Break immediately apologizes to Silver for the attack on the Morg, saying that he never wanted Kranz or anyone to die in the process. Silver quickly cuts him off, saying that Kranz isn't dead, despite her questioning the official statement of him simply recovering from his wounds. In response, Break then drops the truth that should Kranz come back, it's because the government made a clone of him and implanted his memories so he wouldn't be any the wiser. Furthermore, this cloning technology is an offshoot of card technology, and the government has plans on clone replacement when it's most convenient for them. And about all those government-mandated section ID checks that Kranz talked about, those are actually just a way for them to essentially make a save state of one's memories in case they need to be, well, replaced. Silver cuts him off before he continues any further, clearly overwhelmed by all this information, and demands to just know where her sister is. Break then recalls the cloning process to bring her back to life, watching her body be created in front of his eyes. He welcomes her back, and she can only weakly let out his name in response. Break makes the decision to hide this from Silver, and he tells her that her sister is dead. At one point, the two of them learned about the germ and the Great Shadow, and that it posed a massive risk to everyone in orbit. Not realizing what they would get themselves into, Break and Sophia went off to find the Great Shadow, but Silver, who had joined them for jobs in the past, followed them. During the mission, all three of them had become infected by the germ, but Break had already taken a vaccine, so he wasn't in danger. Between Sophia and Silver, there was only one antidote, and with no time to spare, Break chose to save Silver's life by injecting it directly into her heart. Sophia died shortly after, but in her final moments, she looked back on her life with a smile. After hearing this, Silver demands to know where her sister died, and Break gives the location, telling her to be careful before leaving. You can finally catch up with Lura after some time as well, as she was getting maintenance done since the attack on the Morg. She tells you that the thing inside of her chest was a partial memory core of Sophia, which was temporarily taken out and combined with the remaining core that was on Pioneer 2. With the partial memory core back inside her, she brings up the heart unit device that she first mentioned at the very beginning, but for an unknown reason she thinks combining it with her memory core would be optimal for something. Enough time has passed since the attack that the Morg has finally been fully repaired. In that time, Karen had a talk with Pentaglass about his attitude, and while he still doesn't like the current leadership, he'll finally keep his head down and start focusing on his job. Kranz is, also back, but you're explicitly asked not to mention cloning at all. When you approach him, he acts like Kranz normally would, but says he feels like the last week was a complete blur. If you recall when he brought up his lack of a section ID check, that was before the attack on the Morg, so he doesn't have any memory from around that time. Silver is only a few steps away, and she tells you she had met with Kranz, but starts to think about everything Break had told her about cloning. While talking about the things Break told her, she says some pretty powerful stuff. Who is that Kranz over there anyway? What happened to the Kranz I had so much fun with together? Are we supposed to be happy now that he's back with us, or should I be mourning the death of the Kranz I really lived with? You might be wondering, ever since the attack on the Morg, where exactly has Enolis been? Well, Enolis has been hiding in her room the whole time and hasn't left since the attack concluded. You also hear that she's been crying non-stop, realizing that her actions caused the one that she loved to sacrifice himself. So, the second half of this game ramps up the characters quite a bit. It's very easy to get lost in all of this if you're going out of your way to see it all, but don't forget that the principal government and the Arkz have been making massive advancements while this is all happening. Pentaglass fills you in on what the plan is with the Great Shadow, and it's incredibly blunt. As it stands now, card technology can only generate small items and equipment, but with the source of the germ at their disposal, the idea is to create larger munitions and explosives. If any of this sounds familiar, it's because it almost lines up one-to-one with what Brake had said when he was in the Morg. But because of the attack, they're a little behind on finding the Great Shadow, so for the time being, they need to wait for the Arkz to move and react accordingly. Naturally, with Sophia's cloning a success along with the data they stole, the Arkz are making great progress. They believe that the Great Shadow feeds on photon energy, so analyzing the flow of photons on the surface may help pinpoint its location. Combining this analysis with Sophia's information has created a sort of shortcut to the Great Shadow, and a path is currently being built to its location. But with the government keeping a close watch on them, both sides are in a race to the finish at this point. Not letting his recovery time slow him down, Kranz joins Kilria to the location of Blitz's last message. She shares with him some new information, that he was the first person to be infected with the germ and bring it back to Pioneer 2. Furthermore, all of the card technology currently being used has relied on this one sample of the germ that was brought back during this time. With that in mind, Kilria speculates that if someone were to have the source of the germ at their disposal, they would gain enough power to possibly even take over their home planet of Corral. But before they go any further, their conversation gets cut short by Blitz's final message being activated. The Morg is starting to take a look at the map provided in Blitz's message, and the location of the Great Shadow is finally being figured out. Also, Enolis has come back, but she's clearly not in a good mental state. Kranz is there, right across the room from her, but she can't bring herself to talk with him, with her past actions weighing very heavily on her. Kranz starts to pick up on her shying away from him and wonders if he did something to offend her in the time he was out. Silver hates to see her childhood friend tearing herself apart like this, and can even relate with how her own actions caused the death of a loved one. Even so, she doesn't have the courage to talk to her about it. Thanks to the knowledge gained from Sophia, the Arkz have finally built a path to the Great Shadow, but the current levels of photon energy surrounding it are making it very hard to approach. To mitigate this, Red gives you what may be the final mission. Destroy 2 facilities on the surface that control the flow of photons. Brake correctly believes that, should the government find the Great Shadow first, they'll just use it to try to make a weapon like they did with their cloning technology. But he's very straightforward with you about the path he wants to take, which is destroying the Great Shadow first because he's seen too many people die to it. After all, it's a promise he made with Sophia. Lura is found talking to herself, is what you might think, but the fragment of Sophia's memory has actually been speaking to her. The reason Brake would sometimes just hold Lura in his arms is that he's trying to receive forgiveness from Sophia for his actions. And this heart unit she's been looking for, it's not a physical object, rather a sort of greater understanding between herself and Sophia's memories inside her. Before the end of the game, the last fight for both storylines is an attack or defense of a photon rectification site on the surface. Whichever way the battle goes, both sides get the same conclusion. The Morg has confirmed the location of the Great Shadow, and Pentaglass wants you there before anyone else, including the government, and you'll get a shiny new promotion if you do, of course. His secretary instead wants you to go there and destroy it. The existence of the germ has created so much infighting within the government to the point of an extremist group breaking off and fighting against its own people. The migration to Ragal can be done without the germ and without card technology, so she begs you, destroy the Great Shadow and give everyone the home planet they've been wanting for decades. On the other side, the only thing on Red's mind is the human experimentation that went on within the government, and how this could have all been avoided if it weren't for the germ. He tells you straightforward, put their souls to rest, once and for all. Finally, it's time to confront the Great Shadow, and both the Morg and our base are full of people ready to be deployed for their own reasons. Sylphur wants to avenge her sister and confirm everything that she's been learning from Break. Kranz just wants to see his father with his own eyes, in whatever state he's in. Kilria wants to go there before him and defeat the Great Shadow. She wasn't able to stop him when the Morg was attacked, so now it's her turn to protect him. After all, it's her job as his older sister. Neff believes everyone is underestimating the Great Shadow, and that the culmination of all of his experience has led to this moment. By defeating it, he can finally move on with this world, and finally reunite with Zoke. Then there's Enolis. All she wanted was to be happy with Kranz. Even if they weren't together, having him there was good enough to make her happy. But now, all she wants to know is who destroyed those good times. In a fit of rage, she initially accuses you of ruining everything, but is left wondering, what was she supposed to do to show Kranz that she loved him? In our base, Break is ready to destroy the Great Shadow and put an end to all of this torment. He tells you he'll apologize to Lura for making her worry. Lura realizes that the feelings she has for Break aren't just from Sophia's memories, but from her own beliefs too. She wants to go to the Great Shadow and finally get her heart unit, in whatever form that is. For Endu, this is what he's been waiting for a long time. This whole time, he's been keeping his dead comrades in his thoughts, those who may have been forgotten by everyone else. You can pick anybody for this mission, but each of the main characters have their own cutscenes prior to the battle, as they make their way to the Great Shadow. On her way there, Sylphur spots a section ID on the ground and recognizes it as her sister's, and when she makes that connection, all of her memories from that day come back to her. She takes responsibility for destroying the happiness of Break and Sophia, and with her memory fully restored, she pushes onward to atone for her actions. As Break looks toward the Great Shadow, he recalls when the newly cloned Sophia told him its location. She asks him what Break will do, but she doesn't refer to the Great Shadow. Rather, the cloning technology the Arkz possess being limited enough that her lifespan as a clone is already reaching its end. In her final moments, she asks Break how her sister is doing, and once again, she dies with a smile. Break then proceeds towards the Great Shadow, ready to avenge all of the lives taken by it. Lura makes her way to the Great Shadow, speaking with the memory fragment of Sophia inside of her. The memories of her final hours all hit Lura at once, and the humanoid inadvertently starts to shed tears. She sees this as the revelation she's been looking for, proof that she is a living being. Calling on Sophia to give her strength, she continues onward and looks forward to reuniting with Break once again. With the Great Shadow in sight, Kranz hopes Kilria will one day forgive him, and he looks back on his father. Despite never truly liking Blitz for failing to take care of his family, he's still his father, and he still needs to save him. He also takes a moment to thank you for allowing him to get to this point. Asking Blitz to wait just a little bit longer, he makes his way forward. Enolis is lost in her thoughts as she approaches the Great Shadow. She looks back on her life as always being in the way of other people. She also doesn't believe the official report that Kranz survived the bomb in the morgue, recalling the state that his body was in. But without the knowledge of clone technology, all she has is a weary feeling of happiness that he's alive. She throws her section ID to the wind and quietly thanks you for sending her here. Carrying the weight of killing the one that she loved, Enolis promises to destroy whatever is ahead and makes sure Kranz is safe, as it's the only thing she believes she can do. And finally, there's Endu. We'll go into more detail later about this since there is a lot to unpack here. Endu closes in on the Great Shadow and the voices inside of him start to speak up. One male and one female, confirming they're at the right location. The two of them recall the circumstances that led to this point. Dark Falls, despite being defeated many times by the four heroes, would come back stronger and stronger. The consciousness trapped inside Falls, Rico Tyrell, realized that the buildup of energy from these revivals would destroy not just Pioneer 2, but all of Ragol. The consciousness inside Olga Flo, Heathcliff Flowen, also felt this approaching danger. In an instant, the mental strength of both hunters were amplified by one another, causing an excess buildup of energy in both Dark Falls and Olga Flo. This resulted in the physical forms of both entities being destroyed in twin explosions, which were cancelled out by one another. While Dark Falls was finally destroyed in this blast, two things were created as a result. The first is the Great Shadow, left by Falls to find another suitable host. The second creation served as its opposite, a being created by the spirits of Rico and Flowen, destined to destroy the Great Shadow. A child, who Endu realizes is himself. He thanks the two of them for watching over him, and with Rico and Flowen giving him strength, he says farewell to the two of them and marches onward. So now for the biggest question, what do you face when you get there? Well, the game has been dropping hints on something else being on Ragol related to the research that had been done on the germ. And a few missions prior, Kranz decides to share a supposed old story with you about a man who lost both of his twin daughters. He had fallen into a deep depression but one day learned about the cloning technology the government had. In a desperate attempt to bring his daughters back, he requested that they clone them, and for a time afterward, the original clones had lived with him once again. Though his cloned daughters soon learned the truth behind their existence. They saw the government making further clones of them and watched as their bodies were used as the base for human weapon hybrid experiments. So, unable to live with themselves, the daughters took their own lives. As for the father, in his rage he burnt the research laboratory to the ground, and as a result was kicked out of Pioneer 2 to live a life on the surface. As time went on, the government began to focus more on card technology instead, and the remaining human weapon hybrids were left on the surface. As for the man who saw these twisted forms of his daughters, to this day he still wishes he could see them once again. Everything points to this man being the person in charge of Arbase, who once felt sick reading about human experimentation in Pioneer 2, and has a burning hatred for cloning. Like he told you before, put their souls to rest, once and for all. At the end of the road, you come across either the twisted forms of Pollux or Castor. Both daughters have massive weapons grafted to their bodies and engage in combat without saying a single word. The only time you can actually hear them is when you hurt them. On the gameplay side, they're able to attack you from nearly anywhere, have massive AoEs, and can sometimes pierce right through your equipment and deal a ton of damage, but personally that never bothered me too much. The setting and the music for this fight are hands down incredible, and you finally get to see physical proof of so much evil that's taken place on Pioneer 2. So with some luck and skill and probably a few retries, you can finally put these poor children out of their misery. The battle ends like any normal battle would, and then right to the credits. I assume the developers of the game intended for you to do all of one story first, then switch to the other story and complete that. Because the game isn't over quite yet, and after the credits end, it has a very strong way of telling you that. To any poor kid that grew up with this game, I imagine this must have scared the shit out of them. But that's right, the Great Shadow itself is still out there, taunting you to do another playthrough of the other side, because that's exactly what you need to do. In order to get the final boss, you need to first beat the game on either side, see this terrifying screen, and then beat it on the other side. And once you do this, and the other daughter is freed from a tormented existence, what then happens? Amplum Umbra, the Great Shadow, the monstrosity that's taunted you after the credits. Finally, after all this talk, after I mentioned the term Great Shadow dozens of times, finally it's time to destroy it. The design is pretty cool, and you might recognize the bits and pieces of all sorts of monsters that are sticking out of it. It's tough though, and it's not afraid to spawn all sorts of high-cost monsters to try to stop you. It also has a few attacks of its own, like an AoE earthquake or literally launching a meteor shower that damages everything on the field. Way back in my first video about this game, I mentioned how the true final boss was referenced in PSO 2. So the song that's playing right now, it's not a fan-made remix of the final boss theme from episode 3. It's official, and it plays in PSO 2 during a fight against the main antagonist. And their name? Profound Darkness. Once and for all, you strike this thing down. And once again, you're greeted with the credits, but the imagery in the background is different this time. The last remnants of Dark Falls' influence slowly shrivels up and disappears. Pioneer 2 is seen from space, it then gets closer to the surface, and then, after 20 long years, it touches down on Ragol. And that's how it ends. Whoa. Honestly, where do I even start here? This game took so many small details from episodes 1 and 2 that were from a story that wasn't even the main focus of the game, and it turned it into this.
Going back to the 3 sub-stories I listed at the beginning, I want to remind you that those were only the 3 biggest ones. Conservatively, there are 4 more that play out throughout the story, but ultimately all 24 characters in the game have a chance to shine. It feels like night and day compared to the previous game, and while it may sound overwhelming, there's something big worth noting. All of this is combining both storylines rather than going through everything on one, then moving to the other. Some parts of the story are only completed after you see both halves, while some are exclusively seen on one side. For example, this cutscene with Silver and Break. On the Hunter's side, you don't get the scene of Sophia being cloned, but on the Arkz side, you don't get the conversation in the beginning about Kranz. Another example are these 2 scenes with Endu and Neff. Despite Neff talking about Endu in the Hunter story, the actual cutscenes are only accessible within the Arkz story. So while the game does cover a lot of ground, it's at least divided up into 2 halves to make it a little bit more manageable. I have a lot of scattered thoughts about this game's story, but there's one thing I absolutely need to go through first, and that's the big reveal around Endu. To start, I'll be the first to admit that the explanation around Rico and Floen being able to destroy Dark Falls is a bit of a hard sell, to say the least. I tried my damnedest to sound convincing during the big reveal, but I'm just gonna not think about it too much. What I will think about, however, is that both Falls and Olga Flo got stronger as they were continually defeated by the 4 heroes. In less vague terms, they made the levels of difficulty in the previous episodes canon. And not only that, this means that our player characters from the last game are directly responsible for this happening. While Rico and Floen did essentially create the Great Shadow and Endu, that only happened because we kept doing boss rushes. So keep that in mind if you ever play towards the future. You did this. But what I find crazy about this huge reveal is that it's just one of 6 cutscenes before the final boss, and chances are most people would have missed this. So going off each final cutscene, who actually got closure? Well, Endu did for starters, since he was created for the explicit purpose of defeating the Great Shadow. Silver and Break avenged Sophia and destroyed the entity responsible for her death. Lura finally became fully capable of human emotion, so that just leaves 2 people, the man who died and the woman who killed him. Kranz and Enolis have it rough. In the attack on the Morg, Kranz sacrificed himself, and the state of his body after the bomb went off was clearly very gruesome. And for the clone that had his memories planted inside it, what did it eventually discover? Well, Blitz, I guess, in the form of a grotesque monster. Kranz's ultimate goal was to finally meet his father no matter what state he's in, but he was very clearly too late. And Enolis. Her whole motivation throughout the story was to be close to Kranz, but not only did he pay more attention to finding Blitz, she was responsible for him dying.
and she saw every last detail of it happening. And because she was one of the few people not privy to cloning technology, she had no idea what to think about him just magically coming back like nothing happened. Watching her slowly get more and more desperate for Kranz's attention throughout the game, leading to her defecting from the hunters and losing it all. That's just how it is on this bitch of a planet, I guess. Backing up a little from that, we also have to talk about Red's daughters. When I first played episode 3 as a kid, I had no idea who these girls were, so going back today and picking up every tidbit about them, it hits differently, that's for sure. Something I didn't mention leading up to the fight is the last 2 messages you receive from Red. The first is from the mission briefing, where his tune is a little different than normal. He writes that the goal isn't to defeat the Great Shadow, but to have the germ at their disposal and finally destroy the Pioneer 2 government. The second is when you're just about to deploy on the mission, where his comments are eerily similar to what Pentaglass had said before. This is the last that you ever hear from him, so there isn't exactly a resolution here, but at the final hour, it seems that Red's anger about losing his daughters boiled over again, and it blinded him to the danger of the germ.
On a related note, how about those government experiments, huh?
Even before episode 3, when they wanted to use Photon to create a controllable bioweapon and it backfired horribly, or when Principal Tyrell's daughter became the next vessel for Dark Falls and he was booted from his position and was either imprisoned or killed by his replacement. A lot happened in the 20 years since then, and it's clear they didn't learn from any of their mistakes. Humanoid massacres and cloning and human weapon experiments, and instead of witnessing that all happening throughout the game, you live in the shadow of it all. And then there begins a race to the Great Shadow, which brings out the worst in all of those tempted by it. In the end, Pioneer 2 does finally land on Ragal, and everyone on board is free from a life in orbit, but it was a rough road to get there.
I like this idea for storytelling, but a lot of major events feel like they're just brought up in passing rather than the game telling you should pay attention to this. You really do have to get each cutscene and talk to everyone in order to fully know what's going on. And even then, sometimes the game throws a lot of stuff at you at once, so it can be hard to process.
From here, I guess we can go into the supporting characters throughout the game. To be honest, there were a lot of people that I glossed over or just skipped in this video. Trying to organize the things I did talk about was hard enough, so balancing all 24 characters would not have ended well. This is where I definitely recommend you play the game for yourself so you can learn more about each character. But the 2 supporting characters most important to the story are Killria and a disguised Nef Miyama. With how much screen time they get, it feels like the 2 of them should have been main characters. Killria does a lot of investigation off-screen about Blitz, as well as being Kranz's sister, so that could have been expanded upon further. And Nef, I mean, he's the father of a legendary swordsman in episode 1, and he trained Break and Orland. And his request to be dispatched to the Great Shadow is arguably more convincing than almost everyone else. At the very least, I would have liked him to find out about Endu's true identity, considering him and Floen were close friends. In the PSO bundle that includes Episode 3 and Blue Burst, there's an art book that contains the official PSO timeline of events. The final 3 events that are listed in the timeline all lead up to where Episode 3 begins. So after this game, that's it. We don't learn more about the migration to the surface, or the fate of the hunters and the Arkz, or what happens to each character. Some could say they prefer an ending that's more open to interpretation, but I'm one to disagree here. Despite most of this happening within a single game, if you follow the story, you become attached to each of the characters. Watching the lives of everyone change throughout the events of Episode 3, I want them to get closure.
I want to see Silver and Break move on after avenging Sophia. I want to see Lura finally experience a life of human emotions.
I want Endu to live his own life and to find purpose after defeating the Great Shadow. I want Kranz to learn the truth about his death, and for him and Killria to get closure on Blitz. And I want Enolis to be the one to tell Kranz about his sacrifice, and work toward redemption in any way she can. But none of that will happen in any official capacity by the looks of it. As of now, the most references we have to this game are a handful of cards from the now-defunct PSO 2 card game. Relevant to this video, of course there's Rico and Floen with their cards showing them being back-to-back from each other, but there's also 3 other very special cards: Truth Seeker Silver, Break, and Humanoid Maiden Lura. The last one is clearly a reference to one of the cutscenes in the game, but Silver and Break are shown at the location of the Great Shadow. I'm a sucker for any modern references, so of course I find this cool as hell, and while I wish there was more, I'm just happy that Episode 3 hasn't been forgotten.
Of course it only came out on a single console and it had drastically different gameplay and basically just slipped under the radar, but I think it has a lot of charm and it greatly expands on the world of PSO. If anything, I'd like this video to show that, at the very least, this random guy on the internet hasn't forgotten about it.
If you want to give this a try for yourself, there's a fan-made Episode 3 Plus that was updated just last year that I completely recommend. It includes cards that were previously unobtainable, along with official updates and balance patches, and having every character available right off the bat. You also have access to all of the downloadable quests, and you can even play the game online through an emulator. Like I said before, despite this video being very long, there was a lot of stuff I didn't cover, so definitely give this a shot, but have a fast forward button on standby if you do. Alternatively, if you're currently playing one of the private servers for Blue Burst, there's an Episode 2 quest you can check out called Blue Star Memories. It's designed to be a prequel for Episode 3, and it shows a lot of the characters that you'll come across much later in their lives. Your character is also addressed as one of the 4 heroes, so congratulations and good job creating the Great Shadow.
Beyond that, thank you for watching. Even if you skipped over some parts in the video, I hope you can see why I love this game so much. Episode 3 took a story that was seemingly complete, expanded on it, and it truly turned it into something special.
I forgot to mention, another thing you can do if you decide to play this game for yourself, you can talk to Rats. He likes cider, and he likes toys.